Well, good morning and Shabbat Shalom. It is a beautiful early summertime Shabbos, and we're delighted to have you with us. This is VBS Torah Study for a Shabbos morning. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined this morning, as always, by my dear teacher and friend, Rabbi Marc Gellman of South Florida, where it's pouring rain this Shabbos.
Pouring rain.
Pouring rain. Well, here it's hot like anything, so I'm jealous, I have to tell you. Well, good morning, Marc. It's good to have you to be together and to learn together. This morning we are deep in the Midbar, deep in the book of the wilderness, the fourth book of the Hebrew Bible, the book it's called in English Numbers, in Hebrew Bamidbar, which means the wilderness. And here we get the last laws that are given to the people of Israel before they depart from Mount Sinai and take off for the wilderness and their adventure in the conquest and settling in Eretz Yisrael. And it's a sort of potpourri, this parsha. It's a sort of miscellany of a number of issues that Moses is left with before the people leave Mount Sinai. And many of them, that we'll see how they work, they have to do with the sort of edges of the religious experience, right? The parsha begins with a census of the priestly families, and each of the priestly families is given responsibility to carry one piece of the Mishkan, of the shrine. And that image that the shrine, which is this holy thing that we've built, a place where God to enter our world, a dwelling place for divinity, that it gets taken apart because after all, it's a physical object and it has to be carried through the desert, and that somebody has to carry it. In fact, the Hebrew, the name for the parsha is Parshat Naso, which can mean to lift something. In this case, it means to count something. It also means to schlep. And that's what it's about. And the parsha, in some ways, I think, reflects this idea of how do you schlep the holiness of God into the physical world that we live in. One of the really interesting stories or parts of this parsha is a little known and kind of strange set of rules having to do with a character called a nazir. Now, a nazir is a person who feels that the normal course of religious life isn't rigorous enough. And so in order to establish a higher level of sanctity, he or she swears off some of the gifts of life, doesn't eat meat, doesn't partake in various kinds of life, and lives still a higher holy life. The most famous Nazir in Jewish history was a very strange hero, the name of Samson. The idea of him not cutting his hair is because he's a Nazir, except that in the Torah, one takes a Nazirite vow for a certain period of time, and Samson is odd because he's born a Nazir, which is really sort of against the rules, and his superhuman strength comes from presumably from the higher spiritual level. So Marc, talk to me about this idea of asceticism, the denying of the pleasures of the body, denying the pleasures of life in order to establish a higher level of sanctity. In Jewish law, in Jewish life, we don't have a strong history of asceticism, but in this case, there is this one example.
Yeah, I think, look, the issue here in the broadest sense is that Judaism is the only religion without an ascetic clergy. We have, for example, in Buddhism, the householders practice a form of Buddhism, which is fine, but it's not the highest level. The highest level is that which is practiced by the Sangha, which is the association of Buddhist priests called bhikkhus and Buddhist nuns called bhikkhunis. They live the full Buddhist life. And they own nothing, and they beg with their one bowl. They own a bowl, a begging bowl. That's it. And in Catholicism, of course, the priests live the real Catholic life. Now, that's not like Buddhism, it's not completely true. Regular, ordinary Catholics live a holy, sacred life. But the life lived by the priests is clearly understood by Catholics to be on a higher level. And so they have that. We don't. There's no law that applies to rabbis that doesn't apply to every single Jew. That's an amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing we talked about. Rabbis are given the right to judge certain legal cases. It's called Yore, Yordan, Yordan.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, which isn't really a different status, it's just
It's an expertise.
That's what it is.
Look, the reason why you and I are allowed to ask people to rise and tell them what page we are in the synagogue isn't because we're of a different status. It's because we studied the liturgy, we studied the tradition, and we know how to conduct things.
It's a juridical expertise.
Right.
So, okay, so here's the thing. Why is it that we didn't do it and these other religions did? Because it makes sense that if you have a religion with laws, you're always going to have, what do we call in Yiddish, frummies, the frumkeit, the people who want to do more, who want to show that they're even more for Brent, more burning, more zealous for God. And so what I think the nazir represents in Judaism is an attempt to co-opt asceticism. Say, okay, you want to do this. First of all, you have to take a vow. You can't inherit this. It has to be at least 30 days, and it could be up to your lifetime. But you have to say how long it is. And it really just involves not cutting your hair, not drinking alcohol, and not having contact with the dead. And that's pretty much what it is. So I think this is a very instructive point that Judaism was not prepared to buy into the notion that our bodies are our enemies and that physical joy is somehow a sin on one level or another, and that the only way to worship God is to renounce the pleasures of the flesh, even if those pleasures involve, having a glass of wine at Shabbos dinner. So that's my take on the nazir.
This is very important. Let's highlight this. There are religious faiths, and I think even in the popular culture, there is an idea that somehow body and soul are separated from each other. That in order to exalt the spirit, one has to repress the body. I mean, there's a deep Protestant idea there, which then feeds the sort of American idea of a work ethic. Put your nose to the grindstone and don't dream and don't daydream. The idea that body and soul are at war with each other, and that one has to repress the body. That's one side of our culture. And the other side of our culture has completely the opposite idea, which is the body is sacred and all of its impulses are sacred, and repression is a sin, and you should express yourself. This was very popular in my generation when I had long hair and crazy ideas as a kid, and preached this idea of a certain kind of bodily freedom. Freedom from repressive rules and mores that repress sexuality and other forms of our expression. As your thunderstorm. That's God being angry at you.
I think that there's plenty of reasons for God to be angry at me.
Well, then keep your head down.
I will.
Now, in both of these cases, body and spirit are seen as separate. What you have here in the Jewish tradition is a beautiful attempt to unite them into one. To recognize that the body is a creation of God and it is a vessel for spirit. And there really is no way in the world for spirit to touch the world except through body. So we have a mitzvah. What is a mitzvah? It's something you do with your body to express the desires of the spirit, to express the aspirations of the spirit. That's a better way to put it. To express the values of spirit. You want to go and visit a sick friend, you got to do it with your body. There's no other way to do it. You want to give tzedakah, you do it with money. You want to embrace the world and celebrate it, you do it fully with whole. In the beginning of the world, when God creates the human being, puts him in the garden, says he put in all these trees that were pleasant to look at and good for food. And God says to Adam in the garden, "Echol tuchal, eat, enjoy the gifts of the world." So one of the interesting curiosities of the Nazir is a person who feels that if he allows himself to enjoy the gifts of the body, the pleasures of the body, he somehow separates himself from spirit. And so what is it that he's separating himself from? He doesn't eat meat because he's not allowed to touch anything dead. He doesn't drink wine because that's fermented and somehow, gets in the way of his spirituality. And the haircut, which is the famous Samson shtick, I'm going to suggest to you that in many cultures, hair is a symbol of sexuality. And the notion of messing with the hair, that's why in Orthodox tradition, women cover their hair or cut that off altogether. Hair is a symbol of sexuality. And the idea is that I can't live a life as a sexual being. I can't live a life as a sensual being and still live a life as a spiritual being. And what's wonderfully curious about this is that when the Nazir's term of ascetic life is up, when he's finished his vow, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, he brings a sin offering. Why would he bring a sin offering? He's just lived, presumably, a more exalted life. And the rabbis explained to say that you are commanded to enjoy the gifts of the body in this world, that you are commanded to find a way to reconcile body and spirit. You're commanded to find a way to make body an expression of spirit. And the Nazir who refuses to allow his body to become an expression of his spirit and backs away from the bodily pleasures of life has actually committed a sin, because he's given up, he's given away, he's turned his back, as it were, on the gifts that God has given him. And therefore he brings a sin offering. And that's why the Nazir has always been a sort of ambivalence in the Jewish tradition. We do have ascetics. I mean, there were traditions. The mystics used to roll in the snow and take very cold mikvahs, right? I mean, the funniest thing is that we have fast days all through the Jewish year, but the problem with Jewish fast days is we spent the whole day talking about how we're going to break the fast, right? Yom Kippur, everyone's talking about which bagels you'll bring and which whitefish. Don't bring the whitefish you brought last year. Bring better whitefish. Bring this lox, not that lox. I mean, the break fast becomes the focus of the fast instead of the fast becoming an opportunity to experience a certain kind of bodily deprivation. We have always said that deprivation isn't the way to spirit, that the body is a conduit, as it were, an expression of spirit.
One of my favorite citations of Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer, was, he said, "In the world to come, we will be held to account for every delicious food we were offered and did not eat."
Right. Imagine that. Right. You ate tofu. God will say, "You ate tofu? I gave you what? And you ate tofu?"
Right.
Right. I gave you this beautiful world to enjoy and didn't enjoy it. And that's a very interesting idea. Now,
right.
One of the other pieces of this Torah portion, let's move away from Nazir for a minute, because it also has to do with body. It also has to do with wealth and prosperity and goodness in the world, is the priestly blessing that occurs in this parsha. Aaron and the priests are commanded to bless the people of Israel with a 15-word formula. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Yer Adonai panav elecha v'yikunecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. In many synagogues, when I was growing up, the Kohanim would come forward on Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and they would have duchening. And duchening was the way that
I did that. I put that in.
Mr. Katz, who was our resident Kohen, who himself was taught by Aaron the priest, because that's how old he was, would come forward. He'd put his talus over his head. My father would cover my henna because they traditionally
I had the same
you went
thing.
blind, right?
My Zeta said, "Don't look, you'll melt."
Right. And Mr. Katz would bless us. And boy, I got to tell you something. It felt when I was a kid, you could feel the room.
Oh, yeah.
You could feel the power in the room. So, Marc, take us through this blessing. What does it mean, this priestly blessing?
Well, let's look at, it's 3, 5, and 7 words, 15 words. That's interesting because there were 15 steps up to the Mikdash. So let's look at the three clauses. What are they asking? Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Everyone from Rashi on understands the first blessing to be material gifts. May you have food, shelter, clothing. That's number one. And may you have them and not lose them. May you have them and may they not have you.
Mm.
So the first is it's all built on what Gandhi said once: to a hungry man, God is bread. He said, look, when you're praying, let's get this straight. The most elemental prayers for the most elemental blessings are the best prayers, because they are like the foundation stone of a house. Everything is built on elemental blessings, and they are food, shelter, clothing. I mean, people I know who just got back from Ukraine, and they were broken to just see starving children. You just no milk, no nothing. Just the tragedy, the hell that they're living through. These are the most basic things of life they do not have. Forget the freedom and they are dying because they don't have food.
Mm.
And the second phrase is Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Here we have the notion of the face of God, and the second phrase has to do not with material gifts, but with intellectual gifts, which means if the first phrase is may you have enough, the second phrase of the Yivarechecha is may you know that you have enough. You know, that's the Akiva teaching that we're made in the image of God.
We know it.
But the bracha yetera was, the extra bracha was we know it.
Yeah.
So the second phrase is know that you have been given enough. Know that, which would just eliminate greed and avarice and fetching and complaining. And that happens when we see God's shining face. It means God's just looking at us and saying, is any of this registering with you?
Mm.
Is any of this getting to you? That you have food, shelter, and clothing? No, may you know that you have enough. Second phrase. Third phrase, shalom, may the Lord lift up his face to you and grant you peace. Here we have another face image, but this time it isn't the shining face, it's lifting up the face, which I think we all can understand. When you're down and your chin is down, someone, your mommy goes, lift it, come on, lift up your face, lift up your face. And the third one is, may you not want more. Because shlemut, v'yasem lecha shalom, may God grant you peace, doesn't make sense if it means peace. Why would we have a blessing for God to offer us peace as if he didn't know we wanted peace? Of course we want peace, so that makes no sense. What makes sense is that the third one is about shlemut, purity, a spiritual virtue, and that is, may you not want more. So here you have, may you have enough, may you know that you have enough, and may you not want more. And if you look at it that way, it's everything, Eddie. It's everything. What else is there? To have enough, to know you have enough, and to be humble and grateful enough so that you don't want more. that to me is why the Yivarechecha is our oldest prayer, and that's now been conclusively proved by archaeologists. They found 2 silver
Scrolls.
amulets. I think
Yeah.
they were amulets
It was,
around.
it was a silver scroll that was rolled
Yeah,
into
yeah.
an amulet, right, with those words on it.
With those words,
From
and
the
that
first
was
temple period.
first our oldest prayer. And you know, I've said a lot that in the Torah there are no prayers. Well, this is the prayer.
Hmm.
This is the only prayer in the Torah, unless you want to add Moses's prayer for his stricken sister Miriam, who got leprosy because she was gossiping.
Yeah, Ana
It
Elna.
says Elna Rafan Allah,
Right.
heal her God. Other than that one, this is the only prayer in the Torah.
Hmm.
So that's my interpretation of the Yivarechecha.
I love that, because later in Deuteronomy, Moses is going to say to the people that there's a threefold sort of process of appropriating the prosperity of the world. And we put it in our Birkat Hamazon. It's ve'achalta, ve'savata, uve'rachta, right? So ve'achalta, enjoy, eat, it means enjoy the gifts of life. Don't hold back. Enjoy the gifts of life. They're given to you to enjoy. And these are the physical gifts of life. This is food. This is wine. This is comfort. This is sexual pleasure in the right context, of course. This is the gifts of life, right? Then savata, which is your second one.
Now you know you have enough.
Be satisfied, which is such a brilliant idea, because, you know, the idea of the always open mouth, the always grasping hand, the spirit that could never be satisfied, you'll never have enough. Never having enough is a terrible curse. It's a form of slavery, to never have enough, to always have to be grasping for more, for never being satisfied with sameach bechelko, satisfied with what I have. Uverachta, and then express gratitude, share gratitude, give blessing, give blessing. So it fits your formula very nicely. And this is, again, if the Parsha is about appropriating the physical gifts of the body in the world, here's another interesting reflection on how we do that. One of the things that impresses me about this particular blessing is my own experience of it. So when our kids were very small, and when they were born, actually, we decided to bless them every Shabbat. Neither one of us, neither Nina and I, had ever grew up in a house where that was done, but this became our custom. And from the time the kids were born, we would gather them in our arms, and we recite the traditional blessing. For daughters, it's Yisimech Elohim Kasar Rivka Rachel Valeah, and for sons, Yisimcha Elohim Kefraim and Asher. And then we'd say Yivarechecha Adonai v'Yishmerecha. And you know, when the kids were little and squirmy, it was difficult, and they would scream and cry, and we wanted to eat, and it was a mess. And I remember, though, once a friend of mine who happens to be an Episcopal priest and a very, very sensitive educator had Shabbos dinner with us one Friday night. And he watches us do this. And he watches us make kiddush and make motzi over the challah. And I see tears welling up in his eyes. And I said, what's going on? And he said, you have no idea how powerful this is. He says, first of all, you have no idea what this is going to mean to your children in the years after they've left your home and when they grow up. He's an educator, high school educator. And he said, this is what every child in the world wants, and what every human being wants. They want to know that you're enough. They want to know that you're loved. They want to know that you're accepted, and that whatever you accomplish or don't accomplish, whatever your merits or demerits, you know, you're always going to be someone who is receiving the blessing of your parents. And he said, you've just saved your kids years of therapy, because you've told them that they are a blessing to you, and how powerful that is. And then the other thing he said, which was so lovely, he said to me, you know, I've been a priest for all these years, and we do communion, and I never I never saw it this way. He said, but now I understand exactly what communion means in my church, you know, that once upon a time, Jesus and his followers were sitting at a Shabbos table with this family atmosphere, with blessing, with song, with joy, with plenty on the table. And he says to them, wherever you do this, I'll be with you. And that's the meaning of the Eucharist in the Christian faith. He said, you do this every Friday night. He said, we do it every Friday night, come rain or shine. And he was so moved by the religious power of a ritual that we take completely for granted because it is so domestic and simple and common, and then of course, when my kids got older, they wanted to be blessed. Even now, when they're grown-ups, they come to the house, they expect me to bless them. The power to bless, the power to say to a human being, I bless you. Not that I have any kind of metaphysical power to bless, but what I'm saying to my child is, you are my blessing. My life would be incomplete without you. You have completed a piece of me, and my identity is wrapped up in yours and in your faith. You are my blessing. That's what the blessing means. And to hear that from your parents, to hear that from someone, is such a gift. It's such a powerful gift.
That's so beautiful. That's wonderful. It's funny because we did exactly the same thing with our kids through the squirmy times and everything. We did the blessing of the children. We did the Yivarechecha. We also added in the passing of a tzedakah box, and between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we'd empty the box of the coins and we'd say, we're adding some dollars to this. Mom and I are adding some dollars, and we're all going to vote now on where you want us to give the house tzedakah money. And that's sort of how we got into raising guide dogs. They said we should give it to the Guide Dog Foundation, and so we got involved with that. And it was so powerful for them that, just like your kids, they want that done. They'll complain about everything, but not that. And when I was a kid and I was running out to football games or basketball games or wherever, Dad would always bless us with the blessing. And so in the times of the 60s, when I was just angry at everything, I can tell you I became a rabbi because of this bracha, because it was my link to a world that my father and mother were there, and there was a feeling of family and connection and blessing. And I wanted to continue that. And eventually I became a rabbi. And I really am sure of it. That one blessing, the Yivarechecha, that one blessing was my North Star.
And so this parsha, I think what the parsha is asking us to do in all of it's so many different rules, but I think they all have this common thread. They're trying to figure out, how do you live as a body and exalt a spirit? And what the Jewish tradition, I think, did so beautifully was understand that we take bodily desires and we turn them into symbols of spirit. That bodily desires are by themselves neither holy nor unholy. That food, that money, that wine, that sexuality, that appearance, none of this is either holy or unholy. Those two impulses that we find in culture are wrong. To make them holy is to worship an idol. To make them unholy is to deny a part of ourselves. So the point of this is to take it and make each one of these elements a symbol of something very high. So take what we just talked about, food. So food can make you an animal. I mean, that's animals eat, we eat, fast food, right? And yet a food can be a meal, and a meal can be a moment of communion, a moment when family, when friends, when community gathers to share the best of us, and the food becomes a symbol of that. We give challahs to all of our nursery school families here, because we made this wonderful discovery that with a challah on the table, something changes immediately. Even if we're having pizza for dinner, it's Shabbos dinner. And kids identify challah as Shabbos and family and connection and tradition. Food has that power to become a symbol. Wine can make you an animal. Wine becomes kiddush. Wine becomes a symbol of ultimate joy. It's celebrated in all of our moments of joy. Money can become tzedakah. It becomes a tool to heal and help the world. And sexuality becomes kiddushin. That's the holy word for marriage in Jewish life, because sexuality is something shared between loving partners who are communing not just as bodies, but communing as souls. And the communion of bodies is a symbol of the communion of souls. This is what I teach my teenagers. They want to know, Rabbi, what does the tradition say about this? And I smile at them. I say, it's a very simple lesson. We save and we preserve the most intimate body-to-body celebrations for the places and times when we have the most intimate soul-to-soul connection. Soul-to-soul intimacy is expressed in body-to-body intimacy. And they look at me and they say, that makes sense. And I say, yeah, that's the idea. It's not that sexuality is in any way sinful or dirty. It's just not what it ought to be when it doesn't reflect the communion of souls and the care of souls and the responsibility of souls for each other. And that's the elevation of body. And that's what this Torah portion is really about. Well, Marc, thank you for sharing this with me this morning. I want to wish you a very good Shabbos. Careful in the rain outside.
Yeah, I know. I'm staying inside.
Stay inside because, God's looking for you. So be careful, okay?
I know. And
All right.
God's
Thank
gonna
you to
find
everyone who's listening. And anyone here in California where it's 100 degrees, please be very careful going outside as well. We are going to continue our conversations through the end of the month, which I think is another couple of weeks. And then Rabbi Gellman and I are going to take a little bit of a hiatus, and then we're going to come back in the fall. So keep looking for us on June Shabbatot, and we're delighted to be together to learn Torah. This morning, if you follow us, there'll be service from Valley Beth Shalom this morning, a wonderful bar mitzvah and some other celebrations. Of course, Mincha Maariv at 6 o'clock tonight. Every night at 6 o'clock in person or online. Tomorrow morning, Shachrit at 8:30, every other morning at 7:30. And I want to wish you a very, very good Shabbos and a very, very wonderful June. And go outside and enjoy it, not in the sun and not in the rain, but when it gets better, go outside and enjoy. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, my friend.